sino por América Latina completa y por todas las mujeres negras.
Estamos
Muy digna,
muchas.
de verdad.
Y eso pasa por la lectura, pasa por qué textos son los que lees.
Vice President, I'd like you to talk a bit about what it's like to be an Afro-Colombian woman who grew up in Cauca.
Being an Afro-Colombian woman in Cauca is the same as being a Black woman here or in any other part of the world. We're always subject to many forms of violence in this patriarchal, aggressive world. Being a woman of African descent is not an easy task. I come from a people who have lived a long history of exclusion, marginalization, and violence because my grandmothers lived through the violence of slavery. Later, my mother faced violence as well. It's a long chain of violence that needs to be cut. But we're also here with some tough women, fighters who don't get defeated, who for me have been an example of overcoming, of effort, of love, of joy to get us through all these difficulties.
My grandmother always said, when the weather is bad, put a smile on. Do you have any memories of a moment that brought you great joy?
I think joy is our biggest strength. In difficult situations, we're able to smile. People are able to live with that joy. I think that's the only thing they haven't been able to take from us as people of African descent. And I think we're like that everywhere. I imagine that here in Cuba, it's the same.
Yes.
People of African descent, despite their situation, live and enjoy life to the fullest.
We figure it out, as we say here.
That's what it's like in Colombia, too. Despite the fact in the Pacific region where I'm from, people have suffered structural violence, but they're still able to smile. People have used their music, art, culture, and what we are, our identity, to overcome. That's something you carry inside of you. Sometimes it can't be explained.
How do you bring all of these experiences as a Black woman and as somebody who remains close to your African roots, to our African roots, to your role as Vice President of Colombia?
I discovered myself as Black when I was 13 or 14 years old. I had the fortune of getting to know the Black Communities Process, an organization that has struggled for the demands and recognition of Black people and many other people in Colombia. This organization has worked very closely with the Martin Luther King Center here in Cuba. At first, everything Black was bad. Bad here.
Bad here. People here say that too.
It's the same in Colombia. But I think there has been a real process of recognition of identity that's helped me a lot. At first, I also didn't want to be Black. I wanted to be mixed race. I wanted to have blue eyes, straight hair. I used to put treatment in my hair without knowing the damage it does to us because of the chemical, because it hurts our self-esteem. But we do it because we have to be pretty to be more accepted in society. All Black women live through that. But there's a moment in which you say, enough, I want to be free. And freedom means recognizing who I am. I can't be telling somebody to fight for their freedom when my own body and my own being are still in chains, when my mind is still tied down by a colonial system that was imposed on us. That Black is ugly, that Black is bad, and that what is beautiful is what doesn't look like us. It's been a process that I started when I was 13, and today I really don't care. I go around with my natural hair wherever I want. I do my hair how I want.
Your style is very beautiful.
I dress how I want. I don't dress to see if people will like it or not, if the elite accepts it or not. It makes them uncomfortable that a Black woman like me is occupying the vice president's house. With my authenticity, with my identity. It makes them uncomfortable. The most socially acceptable thing people want is for you to get even whiter. to the point that you basically disappear and people can't tell anymore if you are even black or not. I've seen on television where a female presenter arrives and the first thing they do is straighten her hair and then put on some makeup with certain tones.
Lots of foundation.
Light shades that make people question whether it's a black woman or not. We've all gone through these types of experiences, which themselves are violent and racist and get reproduced in numerous ways. I don't hide who I am. Sometimes they say to me, why do you talk with that tone and that accent? Oh, well, that's who I am. A woman from the countryside, a black woman who comes from a people whose native language was ripped away from them and had to learn Spanish by any means. That's always been in us. That's the accent we use when speaking Spanish. Sometimes we don't pronounce things like others do. For many people, that's bad. For us, it's a part of our identity.
But language is made by she who speaks it. I remember reading many things about the scarce access of education for Black and marginalized communities in Colombia. Today we're at Havana's book fair, which I have fond memories of because my mom would come every year to buy literacy classics with very little money. But it was enough because the books were very inexpensive, so I could read them. How do you feel being at today's book fair, which is dedicated to Colombia as the invited country of honor, and which is taking place in a country like Cuba, where access to education has been achieved?
I think Cuba has a lot to teach us. As you said, the progress Cuba has made in access to education is enormous. For us to be here is to learn from the path Cuba took and to learn how we can be stronger. I think we haven't progressed as much in Colombia as we like. There are still many educational challenges in terms of guaranteeing access, guaranteeing permanency, but also in terms of critical education, another type of education that doesn't erase us, but rather help us to continue emancipating ourselves. And that starts with reading. It starts with the books that we read. The official history of Colombia is not one that was written with Black or indigenous people, or it did so, but in a pejorative way. Whenever people of African descent and indigenous people were mentioned, they were slaves.
Instead of enslaved people.
They didn't tell us that we were enslaved. They didn't tell us that part. Now we see Black women telling their own stories. It's not somebody speaking in their name, but rather they themselves, narrating their experiences, their stories, their lives, speaking about their environments. I think that's a transformation that is happening, and Colombia is going through it now. Black women who hadn't been taught to read and write are now learning to read and write and learning to write and tell their own stories. Today, there are many Black, indigenous, and campesina poets, and that fills us with pride. Now there are people who say to me, Francia, we want to write your biography. I don't want anybody to write my biography. I want to narrate it myself. I want to write about myself.
How would a biography of Francia Marquez, written by Francia, begin?
I'd have to start with a story that is not Francia. I think I'd start with the story of my grandmothers, of what they have done so that I could be here, of the path they traveled without knowing how to read or write, so that today I could become the vice president of a country.
In your visit, you have spoken a lot about Cuba-Colombia relations. What would this new chapter of diplomatic relations between Cuba and Colombia look like?
I think that this new relationship needs to be one of gratitude, of Colombia thanking Cuba. In the midst of scarcity, in the midst of the U.S. blockade, Cuba opened its doors to hundreds of Colombian students who have come to study medicine here. And that is Cuba's gift, not just to Colombia, but to the world. And it's incredible how a nation that is economically blockaded is exporting to the entire world science and medicine. Second, Cuba has played a transcendental role in the path of peace that we have initiated in our country. Cuba has been there for us, and it has paid the price that because the U.S. has placed Cuba on this list of countries that sponsor terrorism. I think it's impossible to call a country that sponsors peace terrorists. Without a doubt, Cuba's effort to help us build peace in Colombia is something that Colombians
we'll always have to be grateful for. When I speak about strengthening relations, it implies this recognition, but it also means opening up possibility. Hopefully, we'll have trade relations between Cuba and Colombia, where there is an exchange of science and technology, but above all, where Cuba serves as a bridge to connect the Caribbean and Africa.
What role does the United States play in all of this?
I don't know what role it wants to play. I think it has played a role of imposition in the region. Now it could play a role of facilitator if it wanted to move forward and taking on the challenges of building peace. They are not our enemy, but I think their policy could be changed in favor of and for the well-being of many people.
If you could send a message to our Black Latinx audience in the United States, what would you tell them?
That we're moving from resistance to power until dignity becomes the norm, and that we're going to fight together against structural racism and all forms of oppression that have prevented us from standing up and walking on our own 2 feet.